Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 29.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards. In today's episode, we tackle one of the biggest issues in the profession, and not just in chiropractic, but really in any business, and that's money and our relationship with money. What does money mean? What does it represent? How do we build value? What are assets, liabilities? What does cash flow mean? How does this relate to our practice? How can we overcome our challenges and struggles with money? All things that I've gone through in my own lifetime, my own practice time, and been really able to overcome and learn some strategies and tools to help me along the way. So I'm going to bring my friend Dr. Cratio Jug. Enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Dr. Cratio Jug, welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Thanks, Jamie. As always, I am super duper happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you back on the show. I know we've had a few episodes with Mike and a solo episode in there for those people who listened in. And today what we're talking about is, I think, one of the biggest problems that faces chiropractors, young and old, people who've been in practice for a long time, people who are new in practice, and that is money. Money. As you've heard before.
I was going to say, where's your brother when you need him?
Yeah.
Making it rain.
Today we're talking about money, and it's something that comes up a lot when I'm doing coaching calls with people, whether they're Life by Design elite offices or whether they're individual clients. It's something that repeats itself over and over again. I can absolutely say that, I was faced with this issue myself. I know you've been plagued with this issue in the past as well. So I think it just, it's something that's a pain point for so many chiropractors, so many people just in general, whether it's chiropractic or other businesses or just people in their lives. So I think it bears a conversation. I know it's something we haven't addressed before on Life by Design for Chiropractors, but it's something that really is extremely important. So anything we talk about today, guys, you can grab in the show notes, lifebydesignforchiropractors.com/podcast. Find today's episode, jump in there, and we'll have anything we talked about in the show notes. Cratio, what is money and what does money represent? Let's start there and have a conversation about that and give some context to some of the information and action steps that we'll get to later.
Sure. That is a great... it was interesting. I was listening to you talk, and you said that money is a problem for definitely in chiropractic, but for most businesses in general. I would say that's because money is a problem for most people, because at a fundamental level, we don't really have a clear understanding of what money is and what money represents. Money's paper. That's all that it is. It's sheets of paper that represents value. It represents something, it represents a value. It used to, back in the day, represent a treasury note. So every time you had money, it would be a guarantee of a piece of silver or a piece of gold. But that's that's a conversation for a different time. So that's all that it is. Money represents value. It represents being able to store value that you've created and traded for. Unfortunately, what most people think that money is, and we've heard all the cliches, money is the root of all evil, the love of money is the root of all evil, the chasing of money is the root of all evil. So unfortunately, for most people in the world, money has, come to represent greed and corruption and power and lust. And it has a really negative context and connotation. And on the flip side, it's almost like this, paradoxical thing. We all need money to survive and to get what we want in this world. So that's where most of the confusion for people comes from. They know that they need it. They know that they want it, but they feel guilty or bad wanting it, and they don't really know how to get it. And they think that every time they get it, they're doing something bad or evil to get it. Why
is that, Cratio? Do you have a background as to why people associate, money with corporate greed? And, I think we're seeing a lot of it, fallout from the election, depending on what side, you fall in terms of whether you're supporting Trump or Hillary Clinton, which interestingly enough, I know Trump's a billionaire, but, Clintons are millionaires as well. So that's a whole other side story. But interestingly, why is this just one of those blankouts, I'm sure, for many, many people. But nonetheless, another time. Sure. What's the connection with money and, something that's negative
You know what? Unfortunately, nothing rational or nothing logical or nothing even in reality. The stories that we've been told, fathers, mothers, teachers, preachers, we've just grown up. Nobody's ever questioned. Everyone knows that money is the root of all evil, but nobody's ever bothered to ask himself, what's the root of money? What does money actually mean? What does money represent? And until you start thinking along those terms and start answering those questions deep philosophically, you're never going to get to the right answers. And it's always going to be fleeting. You're never going to want to. It's going to be a lot of cognitive dissonance if you think that money is somehow, even a little bit, if you think that it's bad or dirty or tainted, you're never going to want to fully commit to accumulating a lot of money or creating a lot of money.
Right.
Essentially.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I know for me growing up, it was always, do we have enough money to do, X, Y, Z, right? And so if you did, that was great. And if you didn't, then, I think there's that, there's that emotion that comes along with that. And then other people that did have money to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, there's always that sense of jealousy. And so, I wonder if that's where part of this concept comes from, looking to people who maybe had what you didn't have for whatever reason and however they got that, and, being jealous that they were able to do things that you wanted to do, but you didn't have the monetary ability to do that.
So I think it bears repeating that we go back and we just look at the history of the United States for a little bit, because when I was growing up, and when my parents grew up in a communist country, people that had money, they literally stole it. Like money in communism was not created. So, and this is a fascinating fact about America and the West. Americans actually, the whole idea of the American dream and creating wealth, what that means is you're creating wealth. You're not taking it from somebody. You're actually creating it. So when somebody comes into your practice, doc, and they pay you, $120 or $150 for your first visit, what they're saying to you is they're saying that your first visit is more important to me than this $150. So I'm willing to give you this $150 on my own account in order to trade you for your knowledge, your technology, and your expertise so you can find out if I have a problem that you can help me with. There's nothing immoral or wrong about that. It's a trade. It's one person saying, I value what you have more than this, so here is this paper that you value, and as a result, you're going to give me something back that I value. And what that creates is a win-win relationship.
Right. And you mentioned before in the pre-show, and I think it was Ayn Rand's quote, that money is a tool.
Yeah, money is a tool. Money will get you, she said, money will get you to where you want to go, but it does not replace you as the driver. Money just serves your purpose. It serves you. It's an amplifier. I've heard a good friend of ours, Gary Gunnarsson, talk about money being a moral amplifier. You amplify the type of person that you are, the more money you have. If you're generous, you're going to be a more generous person if you have more money. If you're a good investor, you're going to be an even better investor. If you like gifting people, money just amplifies the type of person you have or you are. So if you're a jerk, then having a lot of money, you're an even bigger jerk now.
Right. If you're a crook, you're an even bigger crook, and so on and so forth.
That's right.
So, given that money is the exchange for value, and, we've talked a lot about on the show and podcasts about how to create value. And, one of the things that happens is, doctors, they say they have a set fee for their examination. For example, it's $150. And then the person comes in and they say, well, you know what? Can I just give you $100? And when you say $100 or free,
or even worse, it was when the doctor says, I have this exam that's worth $2,000, but I'll give it to you for $20.
Right. Well, maybe worse, Gratio, is when somebody comes in and they say, I know your examination is $150, but what if I give you chicken and a loaf of bread
and kill your babies?
for your examination. And I'm not speaking from experience by any means here, guys.
No, not at all. No.
And so what you're saying is I'm worth less. Right? I'm worth less than this $150.
I'm
exactly worth
right.
The equivalent of a chicken and a loaf of bread.
That's right.
So, where this comes from, it leads us to really, what our first major problem is. We're going to talk about 3 problems today, 3 big ones that revolve around money and their philosophy of money. And then we'll talk about, in chiropractic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then we'll talk about, how that shows up. So you can start to look for some of these signs as you're constantly, auditing your practice and auditing your life. And then we'll give you some action steps at the end that will work for you. So the first one is, the difference between a service mentality and value exchange. So, what do you mean by service mentality, Cratio?
Sure, that's a great. Everyone knows the chiropractic service mentality. We need to save the world. We need to save the world. People need chiropractic. They deserve chiropractic. And, by God, if I have to starve, I have to be the one that delivers chiropractic to my community because I was put here. This is my purpose. That's what I'm meant to do. That's the service mentality.
Yeah, we should stop there for a second because I'm sure that sounds, extremely common for people. It sounds extremely familiar to people. I know at one point it sounded extremely familiar to, the way that I thought about things.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
You hear that story over and over that chiropractic chose you. You didn't choose chiropractic. And that's the beginning that's the beginning of the end, where you start to think that, somehow that, your purpose is to serve your community chiropractic at all expense. And that means at your expense, right? And in that sense, going back to previous podcasts, that's something that is, really sacrificing yourself for your community. And somehow, that's a positive for you. But what, I've been there and I've gone through that process and, from the box on the wall to, basically giving it away to, whatever we could do to get the community chiropractic. And, I think very interestingly, my practice was never bigger than when I stopped doing that and started charging people money is when we really started to grow. And there's probably other factors, but the point is, it's not as if it was working. Do you know what I mean? It's not as if, I was being called to do it and I needed to give it away. And I've been there and done that. I had signs on
your advantage.
I had signs on the front window that talked about my fee system. And, I remember people taking pictures of it when they walked by because they probably thought it was a good idea. But in retrospect, they probably thought, look at this guy. He's giving it away. This is amazing. I can't believe this is hilarious. Somebody's doing this. And, if there'd been social media back then, I'm sure I would have been all over social media. But this service mentality, it starts to deteriorate the idea of value exchange, right?
Look at what it's done to the market in chiropractic. It's created chiropractic as a commodity, the lowest bid.
Oh, of course. And you see that with basically any healthcare provider, I think, who's dealing in, not to say that this is what we deal in, but I think people are dealing in any kind of musculoskeletal, care, aches and pains, that type of stuff. There's just a pool of providers and it's all the same to people. People don't know any different, whether it's a physiotherapist or a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or massage therapist. So they're looking for who can do it the fastest for the cheapest, and rightfully so. Right? Why wouldn't you?
Sure.
If you're in the market and you're a consumer and what you're looking for is pain relief, you're going to look for who can give you the pain relief the fastest, the cheapest, and, the least painful.
Sure. So it's not, sorry to interrupt you for a second, it's not the public's fault. The public opinion about chiropractic has got nothing to do with the public. It has to do with chiropractors.
Oh, it's absolutely shaped by what we've projected as a profession for a very, very, very long time, in conjunction with some other factors just in the marketplace. But the place where you're going to be able to, carve out a niche is, again, going back to value exchange, is starting to move chiropractic away from a commodity to some type of value service where you're giving something that's important to people, valuable, something they want, and then getting a fee in exchange for that. And whatever fee you think that you would like to price it at, the market will tell you what it will bear, and it will be a combination of, what the market is willing to spend, but also, the amount of value you can create and whether you can create a value gap in your process. So when people come in and, when you go through your day one and then your day two, and if someone has a core problem and you decide to correct it and you're going to work on it together and you map out some financials for them, when you show them what something costs and they go, oh yeah, that means that you created a value gap, either because you created enough value or because your fees were far too low. But if your fees are beyond, at the top end of the market and people are still saying, oh yeah, no, let's do this, that's a really positive sign. It means you're really building some great value and there's a gap there and people are jumping on board. So That's the distinction there, Cratio, is, are you just serving your community or are you exchanging value with your community? It's a big difference. And you'll see that when we talk about some of the negative outcomes of that. The second one is just this idea of cash flow. And I think it was interesting in the pre-show, you talked about how cash flows. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So, again, the purpose of money is for you to create the life that you want, to have the things that you want to do. And in order for you to do that, I hate to break it to you, this was me, because I keep blaming my parents for this. I'm an adult. I can figure these things out for myself. But, a lot of times I would just want to sit on the money that I had because it felt safe and it felt good. But in order for you to succeed, you have to keep creating wealth. And in order for you to keep creating wealth and keep creating more money, you have to keep creating value for the same people. You have to create more value in order for them to give you more money, or you have to find new people to start creating value for. And that's how business works. It's a cycle.
Yeah, well, how many times in the past you had a good month, you got a handful of new people, they started, they paid, wow, we really raked it in this month. And then you go into that, protective mode. I need to protect all of this. I need to just keep it all in the bank and obviously that's the incorrect mentality because, as we said, cash flows. And every single month you have things going out. And if you look back on the months where maybe you had an upswing, hopefully, if you're doing everything correctly, it's probably because you actually made some investments in time and energy and money, maybe all of them, and you start to see the uptick. And when the uptick happens, people pull back and they forget that, it was the investment of, let's say, this $400 into whatever, a screening or coaching or something online that turned into $4,000, right? That's how cash flow works. That's how an investment works. And heck, if you could get a 10 multiplier every time you invested $400, you should be looking for more places to invest $400 or scale your $400 to 4,000 and see if you can make 40,000.
Yeah, that's the thing that's really difficult. And I think we can both speak to this. I remember when we used to get together for call it the Lonely Hearts Club when we were first in practice, and we would talk about what was out there and how much it would cost. And for us, we only saw the dollar sign. We'd only see, oh my God, I have $10,000 in my account. I have to pay my bills. This is going to cost me $2,000. So what the heck am I going to do? Whereas somebody who can create cash flow will look at that and say, oh my God, $2,000. What if this is a 10x multiplier? What if I invest $2,000? It makes me $20,000. And all the spin-offs up to $20,000, right? So, if I knew that I could spend $400 somewhere, like to coaching or to marketing, and I knew that it would make me $4,000, it wouldn't take me too long to figure out that if I put in $4,000, I could get $40,000 out of it.
This is where it really starts to, move up and becomes an exponential thing where you start to get something that works and you start to scale it. That's, a principle in marketing is,
what are we hearing?
Constantly investing in order to increase the outcome on the other side once you've tested that out.
Sure. And what do we hear in chiropractic? I can't afford a website and I can't afford to advertise on Facebook and I can't afford to do this. And listen, we're not advocating that all of a sudden you wake up tomorrow morning and you just, get a loan for $40,000 and throw it somewhere. We're saying that you start, you test, and then if something's working, you put more money behind it, but you can't be scared to start putting money behind something. Otherwise, you're not going to move anywhere. The cash is going to flow right out of your account into your banker or, to your mortgage payments, and then you're going to be in some big trouble.
Well, I just can't state enough the importance of understanding the concept of cash flow and what that means to your business and what that means to your life. And, in this concept of creating value, it's not about how much money is coming in necessarily. It's how much is coming in, coming out, and the end result of that. That's your cash flow. So if you can create value, you can increase your cash flow. It's okay to invest more money to make more cash flow come into your business. And that cycle continues on and on again, which, Cratio, leads us to the third point. And, one of the issues that chiropractors have is really understanding the difference between an asset and a liability or an investment and a liability. Explain some of the fundamentals about those concepts.
Yeah, so on a basic level, a liability is something that costs you money every month. And an investment or an asset is something that creates money for you every month. So if you have your balance sheet very basic, you want to make sure that your assets are always greater than your liabilities. And then you're always going to have positive cash flow. And in fact, your cash flow is going to keep getting bigger and bigger. If nothing else changes and your liabilities stay the same, and your assets were the same, but your assets were larger than your liabilities, month after month, you're going to have more money in the bank. You're going to have more money saved up, and you can create investments and you can create more assets.
Great. So what would be assets, in the sense
for
of
chiropractors?
For chiropractors, sure.
Yeah, so yourself, number one, the most important asset, being able to communicate chiropractic, having systems, having procedures, having technology, knowing what you're worth, knowing how businesses run. And these are the fundamental things that most chiropractors lack. Going back to, and I can speak for myself, for example, going back to early in practice, I honestly thought that if I just told the story to enough people, then enough people would come into my practice and everything would be good. And that is the exact opposite of how things turned out. Very much like you, it wasn't until I started valuing myself more and I started practicing my communication and I started learning and spending money on marketing and investing in myself, that's when things started to pick up. So the number one thing that chiropractors can invest in is themselves. That's first and foremost.
Yeah, I can say, the one upside and positive qualities and characteristics for me over the last 15 years is, I know you can speak to this and support this, but I've never been afraid to invest in myself. I've never been afraid to invest. My risk tolerance is fairly high in terms of, even being at large, at really some really deep places in debt, I've still recognized the need to invest. And, I've constantly done that. And when I was able to cash out and, get on top, I reinvested again. And that's what we've done here at the center. Things were going great prior to the center, great practice, a couple houses, everything was great. And everything was wonderful. But I knew that, deep down, it wasn't my ultimate dream. And so I cashed out and reinvested and went way back deep in debt. But, now 18 months later, we're creating great cash flow. We're building great value in our community, and things continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. And the cycle started all over again. And it's fun and it's exciting. And, it just comes back to this, main piece we're talking about, and that's understanding that, it's all about creating value. And if you want to earn more, because that's always the question of people, how do I create cash flow? You create more value. That's it. That's why, that's why you find coaches. That's why you find products. That's why you find books. That's why you take courses. That's why you invest in yourself to be, more skilled, have greater capabilities, be more productive. Your ability to earn money is far higher by investing in yourself than it is by, throwing it into, whatever, a house or, some type of real estate. Not to say you shouldn't do those, and those aren't good potential avenues, but I think the starting point for people is just make yourself an asset, right? Turn yourself into somebody who creates cash by delivering value for people and learn how to do that. And if you can do that, was it Rockefeller Creatio? I think you said if they took his millions, he'd be a millionaire again in 6 months or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's Warren Buffett's quote, right? The more you learn and the more you earn is one of Warren Buffett's favorite quotes. And it's interesting. Yeah, when you were speaking, I was thinking about a classic Jim Rohn story. I'm sorry. If you guys don't know who Jim Rohn is, you really need to find out. That was Anthony Robbins' mentor before Anthony Robbins became big. And Jim Rohn tells us one story about how most people treat their job or how they treat their work. They sit there and they're upset and they're like, if I just had more money, then I would take this job more seriously and I'd be able to act a certain way. Mm-hmm. And it's backwards. You have to start acting and learning a certain way, and then the money is a result of that. Right. Like we've been talking about the whole time, the money is a result of value. If you don't like where you are financially, you're not creating enough value. Right? And it
really is that simple.
At the basic fundamental, that's exactly what's happening. Either there's a philosophical block or there's just a value creation block. And until you resolve that issue, nothing's really going to change, unfortunately.
So the result of all this, and I think it comes out to this, characteristic that we can probably classify simply as just scarcity. Right? When you're in the service mentality, you're restricting cash and, you're over leveraged with liabilities. Generally, your mindset for most chiropractors is now you're stuck in scarcity. And the outcomes of that are all the things that people are trying to get away from, right? You have decreased growth, poor retention. You're afraid to pay your staff what they're worth or hire staff that are worth it. You think people are going to leave you. The thought of even gifting a practice member for a referral to buy them a gift certificate for $50. We can't do that. You're happy you got the referral, and you'll be happy to take the money that person brings in. But, the thought of gifting somebody for that, and the big problem and take home, and you mentioned this earlier, is when you're in that state of scarcity. And I think this is the big thing that, haunts chiropractors. And I think I was on a call today, probably 2 calls where this came up. You lose your vision and you lose your dream. And you're living in a world where a mediocre practice all of a sudden becomes an okay practice, and one that you're okay with and you're content with because you're paying the bills and things are moving forward. But it's being in that scarcity mindset for so long that has essentially kind of decayed that vision that you had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or when you first got out of practice.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one thing, Jamie, that we need to at least briefly talk about is the idea that I think a lot of us are because we care so much, going back to that service mentality. And even if you're out of the service mentality, you still care about the people that come into your practice. But one of the things that we really need to get over is the idea of taking it too hard when people say no. Like the other day, the craziest thing happened. I was in the Apple store, and Ari was playing with the iPads, and I was looking at a computer, and the guy asked me if I needed help with that product, or if I was interested in buying it, and I said no, and he said okay, and he just walked away, and that was it. That was the end of the conversation. He didn't cry about it. He didn't go home and tell his wife, that somebody said no to him. The answer was no, and for him it was like, great, I valued my $2,000 in that moment more than that computer. Didn't need that computer, so I said no. That's all the people that are saying to you when they come into your practice. They're saying, I don't value this enough to pay for it. So you have 2 things. You can either increase the value or you can keep decreasing the price. And I don't think that's a good idea.
Right. Yeah. So, the other thing I think that's interesting, and it was actually you who brought this up, Cratio, is it's very similar to our patients.
Yeah, that's exactly what we tell them when they come into our practice. They're stuck, their health is stuck, they're taking all these medications and all these drugs and they're sick. And you say, listen, in order for you to get off these drugs and start feeling better, you're going to have to make a change, and it's not going to feel great, but it's going to work if you can do it. And because they're so scared, they say, I don't want to take everything. Everything's stable. I'll just sit right here and wait.
Right. And so here we are, preaching to them and trying to move them along the spectrum towards, optimal health, if we'll call it that. What's the difference with us in our own lives, our own practice, building a bigger practice, a better practice, a more profitable practice, whatever your goals are. I'm not saying each of those are the ideal. It's up to you what you would like to create in that process. But, it's so funny. We've talked about this, the requirements of a successful practice, very similar to the concept for requirements of a healthy body. And all the things that we tell our practice members, and we get super frustrated that they don't want to do these things, like, follow through with their recommendations, invest money into their care, exact same thing that you don't want to do for yourself, which I think is just, such a glaring contradiction that so many doctors are just simply unaware of, Cratio.
Yeah, totally. You expect people to make these changes and for them, to pay you the money and for them to go through this process. But when it comes to you, you're scared to do it. And I understand, oh my God, I was there. And to be honest with you, sometimes I'm still there. But you claw and you fight and you keep moving forward, because staying the same, you can't stay the same. If things stay the same, if you're making the same amount of money you are today, in 10 years, it'll be a lot less money because inflation is going to go up, the cost of living is going to go up, everything's going to go up. So you better keep creating that cash flow.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's talk about, to finalize the show here, Chris, let's talk about what to do. And this is actually a very, very simple process, and it works for pretty much anything that you want to get really good at. And I'll give you the 4, and then I'll let you comment on any of these, Cratio. Awareness. So just recognizing that there's a problem here and that you would like to be better and you're not. Number 2 is knowledge. So acquiring the knowledge to understand what it takes, the skills, the capabilities, coming up with a strategy, and then taking action. And then using that, process and the outcomes to deliver your feedback, and then rinse and repeat. Become more aware, see where things aren't working, acquire more knowledge, come up with a strategy, apply the strategy, see how it works, and just rinse and repeat over and over and over again.
I don't really have too much to comment. That's exactly what it is. The awareness can also be another emotion. It can be disgust. It can be anger. It can be frustration. It can, it can be anything that will trigger you that things are not working well, right? And the next thing you have to create is you have to create knowledge. And here's the big thing with this. You could be wrong, right? You could set off in a direction that's the wrong direction. And you could do something and it could cost you money and you might not be able to get the investment back and you might lose. But, going back to risk management, at least you're moving. And eventually you're going to move in the right direction because you keep moving, you keep trying. If you stay the same, if you stay still, you will fail, guaranteed, 100%. So it's worth the action. It's worth getting off your butt and trying something, even though it's going to be terrifying. And there's a chance that you could lose on it. And this is like advice that I wish I could say to myself, 8 years ago when I started in practice.
Yeah, no, it's great advice, great show. I think it applies in so many different areas. Today we're talking about money and our relationship with money, specifically for chiropractors, the challenges that face us in the profession, the things that lie between us being ultimately successful and where we're at in many cases. So these are the steps for you guys. You just need to be aware, pay attention. I love the idea of using our emotions as a barometer, right? Where are we happy? Where are we not happy? What do we love? What do we hate right now? What isn't working? Where are we frustrated? Acquire the knowledge, seek out, whether it's books or websites or people who've been there and done that before, and then work together, create a strategy, and then get to work. And I hammer this home so often in my coaching calls. In fact, when I work with a lot of people, it's interesting how a lot of my first calls aren't about day one and day two. They're about productivity. Because I can give you everything that you're going to need. I can work with you and guide you and really help you along. But if you don't have the ability to work on your business and the ability to manage the tasks that it's going to take and to manage your to-dos and how to prioritize and put things into a hierarchy, if you can't do that well, you are going to fail. And so, taking action is such an important piece of the puzzle. And then, as we said, just use that as feedback and rinse and repeat. So, guys, if you want any of the information we talked about today, go over to the show notes, lifebydesignforchiropractors.com/podcast, and you can grab those. Thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.